and welcome to 8 to 10 Minutes. Just over a month ago, President John F. Kennedy and the whole of the USA could rest easy. A month ago, we were all at peace. But since the events of the past month, the developed world has ground to a halt. 13 days of absolute paranoia and frenzy. 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. On October 14, 1962, following the reauthorization of reconnaissance missions over Cuba. U-2 pilot Major Richard Heiser captured 928 pictures of Western Cuba. The next day, CIA photo analysis discovered objects unmistakably interpreted as medium and intermediate range ballistic nuclear missiles. The CIA had uncovered an SS-4 construction site in Cuba, located just 90 miles from Florida. The implications of the discovery were clear. Much of the eastern US, if construction was allowed to be completed, would be under threat of a nuclear attack from the Soviets, swinging the balance of the Cold War to a more even playing field. Were you confident that Kennedy would back down?
After our meeting at the Vienna summit, I believed that I could push the American president around, and I was confident that he would fold. However, his resilience was surprising, to myself especially.
Was there ever any intention to start a nuclear war?
If the American president had pushed me further and been overly aggressive, I would have had no choice but to answer his attack with my own. However, by sending in the missiles to Cuba, I had no plans on starting a war.
Why did you plant the missiles in Cuba?
I placed the missiles in Cuba because they are an ally of ours close to the United States. I also wanted to further increase our nuclear strike capacity and further deter any US aggression against the Soviet Union.
Give us an overview of what happened.
I was informed of the discovery of the missiles on the 16th, which I then responded to with the formation of XCOM. Also, I never intended to start a war, as I wanted an alliance between us and the Soviet Union. However, the discovery of the missiles halted all peace talks.
Were you confident that Khrushchev would back down?
I would like to say that I was 100% sure Khrushchev would back down, but like everyone else, I couldn't know for sure. However, with Khrushchev being a reasonable man and leader, I had a firm belief that he would make the right choice.
Was there ever any intention to start a nuclear war?
I never wanted to start a war, and I don't believe the Soviets did either. This is because if we were to have had a nuclear war, the majority of the world, and most definitely our nations, would have been destroyed.
What was your solution?
The solution that I settled on was to form a naval quarantine around Cuba to prevent further missiles from being deployed. This was despite advice from many of those in XCOM calling for airstrikes on the missile sites, or even worse, a full-scale invasion of Cuba. I also issued an ultimatum that all missiles in Cuba were to be removed.
The American people were informed about the events occurring on their doorstep on the 22nd of October.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
The whole world waited in anxious anticipation for the response of the Soviets. On the 24th of October, the conflict reached its peak. Soviet ships approached the quarantine line heading for Cuba. This was the closest the conflict reached to an all-out war, as an attempt by the Soviet ships to breach the US naval blockade could have escalated to nuclear warfare. However, the ships came to a halt before the blockade, averting the crisis.
Honestly, Mr. Kennedy, I'm surprised you've misconstrued this simple act of transporting our weapons as an attack on your interests. So, Fidel.
Fidel Castro has been the sole leader of the Republic of Cuba for the past 3 years, and in that time he has made some rather monumental decisions concerning the state he governs. however none as hefty as the crisis he now faces. As we speak, the nation of Cuba, and by extension the rest of the world, is on the edge of its seat as USA and the USSR stare each other down in the face of a possible nuclear holocaust. So Mr. Castro, what is your current stance and feelings towards both parties involved in the crisis at this time, and how do you intend to act going forward?
Well, for starters, I feel it's important to note my country's direct ties to the USSR and the natural bias we have towards supporting the actions of Mr. Khrushchev. On the other hand, my distaste for the United States following the ignominious failure that was the Bay of Pigs invasion. On that note, in light of the current events, I feel it's very hypocritical on behalf of President Kennedy to have kicked up such a stink concerning the stationing of the ICBMs within range of mainland America, when they have done much the same, stationing their own nuclear weapons in Turkey in an obvious threat towards the Soviets. In regards to my actions going forward, I have no intention of backing down, nor do I intend to loose the missiles on America unless justified.
Following that, I, and the viewers, would like to know if you ever wanted the ICBMs in the country, or if your hands were tied to a degree.
The acquisition of the missiles was, in many ways, a two-edged sword. For the most part, I was hesitant to accept the warheads, as I knew the US would misconstrue it as an attempted attack, incorrectly, of course. However, I also knew that could be useful as a gambling chip over the United States.
A resolution to the conflict was of paramount importance to both parties. On the 26th of October, Khrushchev delivered a message to Kennedy. He would remove the missiles in Cuba if the US agreed not to invade Cuba. The next day, adding that the US must also remove their installations in Turkey. The Kennedy administration agreed to the first proposal officially. However, in private, also agreed to remove the Turkish missiles. The message was delivered to the Soviet ambassador on the 28th of October. The Cuban Missile Crisis had come to an end. An important fact to note is that as a result of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a direct communication line between the Kremlin and the White House was established. Also, despite the teetering on the brink of nuclear destruction, the Cold War continues to rage on. And that rounds out the program for tonight's coverage on the recent Cuban Missile Crisis. We hope this has been an informative presentation for our viewers. Thank you, and good night.